Dark Side of Olympus. The untold truth about the Greek gods. Before we begin, dim the lights. Light a candle if you're feeling brave. Get comfortable, but not too comfortable, because by the time we reach the end of this tale, the gods you once thought you knew will feel like strangers. Welcome. I'm Edric Solon, and I'll be your storyteller tonight. Not a priest, not a scholar, just a traveler of forgotten truths. And tonight, I'm here to tell you about power, about love, rage, hunger, punishment, and pleasure, about the divine and the monsters it created. You came here expecting gods, and you'll get them, glowing with lightning and fury and eternal beauty. But you'll also meet the mortals they left behind, the nymphs who ran, the boys who vanished, the women who were cursed for daring to say no. This isn't mythology class. This is the version of Olympus they never let you hear. The side that didn't survive the temples. The side that was whispered about by the broken and the brave. You see, in Olympus, the stories were never about right and wrong. They were about who got to tell them. And tonight, we're taking that power back. So stay with me. Don't skip. Don't scroll. This isn't just a history lesson. It's a resurrection. And if you think you know the gods, wait until you hear from the ones they destroyed. Because once upon a time, long before kings and cathedrals, before laws and borders, there were stories. And those stories shaped everything. But they weren't clean. They were bloody, seductive, vengeful, and sometimes beautiful. So welcome, listener. You've entered the Forgotten Garden. Olympus awaits. But beware, the gods are not kind. They never were. Now, let's begin. Zeus the tyrant, the empire of thunder and lies. Let's begin with the one who was called king. Zeus, the storm bearer, the ruler of the skies, the god of gods. But tell me, when a man writes his own legend, what lies does he bury beneath thunder? You've heard the stories, haven't you? Zeus, the heroic rebel who overthrew his cruel father, Cronus, a liberator of the Olympians, a protector of justice, or so the poets say. But history has a shadow, and even gods cast theirs long. Let me tell you another version, one rarely whispered, one carved into stone and shattered under temples. Because Zeus wasn't a king, he was a conqueror. The rise, born in blood. Zeus was born during chaos. Not metaphorical chaos, real, screaming, monstrous chaos. Cronus, his father, had swallowed his siblings whole. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, all devoured like coins into a bottomless well. Why? Because Cronus feared them. There's always fear at the beginning of every dynasty. Cronus himself had overthrown his father, Uranus, with a sickle, and his mother, Gaia's encouragement. What goes around in Greek mythology doesn't just come back. It arrives drenched in prophecy and blood. So, fearing the same fate, Cronus tried to end the cycle by ending his children. But Rhea, goddess of motherhood, queen of suffering, couldn't bear to lose another. So she hid the youngest, wrapped a rock in swaddling cloth, and gave it to Cronus to eat. Cronus swallowed a lie. And somewhere in a secret cave on Mount Ida, in the island of Crete, Zeus was raised in hiding, nursed by a goat, shielded by warriors who banged their shields to drown out his cries. The future king of the gods was born a fugitive, not a noble beginning, a fearful one. The war of the gods. Zeus grew, not into wisdom, into ambition. He didn't dream of justice. He dreamed of power. And when the time was right, he waged war against his father, freeing his siblings from Cronus's stomach in one of the strangest birth scenes mythology has ever offered. Then came the Titanomachy, The war of the gods versus the Titans. 10 years of sky-shattering violence. Mountains hurled like stones. Oceans boiled into mist. The cosmos held its breath. And when it ended, Zeus stood victorious, and the gods stood above the Titans, shackled, buried, or worse. But victory has a cost, and those who rise through violence tend not to become kings, but tyrants. The king of Olympus, Zeus, took the throne, and from the very beginning, he rewrote the rules. He didn't just become the king of gods. He demanded order, but only if that order served him. His brothers were given domains, Poseidon the sea, Hades the underworld. But make no mistake, Zeus sat above them, in the throne on Mount Olympus. And the throne was gilded not with honor, but control. He demanded worship, obedience, fear. And when mortals questioned him, he flooded the world. When a woman resisted him, he became a swan, or a shower of gold, or a bull, or an eagle. He did not seduce, he took. This isn't metaphor, this is mythology, which, like all things ancient, was brutally honest. Zeus was not a god of love. He was a god of thunder, and thunder doesn't ask for permission. The children he abandoned, let's talk about his children. He had many, too many. Hercules, Perseus, Helen of Troy, Minos, Aeacus, Dionysus, Athena, born fully armed from his skull, because even birth was a battlefield. But what did he do with these children? He left them. He used them as pawns, gave them quests, tests, fame, or let them die in wars he could have stopped with a breath. They were not family. They were tools. And Hera, his wife and sister, yes, both, suffered most of all. Hera, the queen in chains. Hera is remembered as jealous, vindictive, cruel. But look deeper. She was married to the king of gods, a serial abuser of mortals and divine alike. She had no power to stop him, only the power to punish those he victimized. She raged because rage was all she had left. They called her the goddess of marriage. Let that sink in. The nymphs who fled remember Io, a priestess of Hera. Zeus fell in lust with her, and when Hera grew suspicious, Zeus turned Io into a cow to hide her. She wandered the earth, hunted, cursed, never free again. Or Callisto. Olaur of Artemis, vowed to remain pure. Zeus tricked her, some say as Artemis, some say by force. And when she became pregnant, she was cast out. Later, she was turned into a bear and flung into the stars. A constellation. That's supposed to be a gift? More like a reminder, a scar in the sky. Zeus turned desire into punishment, and the world called it mythology. Thunder as a crown. Why does this matter? Because Zeus became the archetype, the prototype for every king who said, "I rule by right," for every abuser who cloaked himself in divinity, for every empire that crushed those beneath it and called it justice. He wasn't evil. He was worse. Beloved. He was worshipped. Feared. Immortalized. And to this day, we say, "By Zeus," as if his name was harmless. But thunder doesn't bless. Thunder demands silence, and Zeus ruled by storm. What the mortals knew in the myths whispered by the common folk, not the Homeric bards, but the farmers, the women, the old men around the fire. Zeus was not a father figure. He was the storm you prayed would pass. He was the shadow in the sky that turned day into dread. And if you were lucky, you'd live your life without catching his eye. Because in Greek mythology, to be noticed by a god was not a blessing. It was a curse. Zeus today. They turned him into statues. They painted him with perfect muscles and flowing beards. They made him noble. Hollywood made him wise. Disney made him funny. But the truth is carved into every myth he touched. Zeus was power without mercy. desire without consequence, and his crown was made of storms. So the next time someone tells you Zeus was the father of gods and men, ask them how many children he loved. Ask them how many women said yes. Ask them who told the story and who was forced to forget it. We are just getting started. Olympus is full of secrets, and not all the monsters live in the underworld. Hera the Vengeful, the true victims of her rage. Before we begin, take a breath, because the woman we're about to speak of has been called many things: jealous, angry, cold. But no one ever called her right. And when history refuses to let a woman speak, I do. Before she was queen, Hera's life begins in darkness, literally. Her first memory is likely the inside of her father's stomach. Cronus, the Titan king, had swallowed her, along with her siblings, to prevent a prophecy. She was trapped inside his belly, alive and divine, for who knows how long. No light, no voice, no choice. That's the first theme in Hera's story: powerlessness disguised as destiny. When Zeus finally overthrew Cronus and cut open his gut, Hera was born again, not as a child, but a goddess, resurrected fully grown into war, chaos, and thunder. She never got a childhood. She got a throne instead. The god of lies, the goddess of marriage. Zeus saw Hera and wanted her. That's the clean version. The real version: he tricked her. He became a wounded cuckoo bird, tiny, cold, shaking in a storm. She held him close. She protected him. She loved him. Then he transformed back into himself, radiant, terrifying, absolute, and claimed her. Guilt became consent. Divinity became contract. He said she was his queen. But she would soon learn that queens do not reign in Olympus. They endure. The irony of her domain. Hera is the goddess of marriage, women, family, childbirth, the very institutions that destroyed her. It's as if the gods were mocking her, giving her the crown of the very things that Zeus shattered. Marriage? Hers was a betrayal. Women? She punished them for being seduced, tricked, taken. Family. She was mother to children who feared her. She never birthed a daughter, only sons. And they turned against her. Hera ruled over symbols, not truths, and that is one of the cruelest tricks Olympus ever played. Her children, her pain. Let's speak of the children, because Hera, like most women in mythology, is judged by what she births. First came Ares, god of war. Hera birthed him alone, in vengeance, because Zeus had given birth to Athena without her. Ares was hated by gods and mortals alike, and Hera, for all her maternal energy, couldn't protect him. Then came Hebe, goddess of youth, the cupbearer, always young, never heard. Eileithyia, goddess of childbirth, irony upon irony. Because Hera was often barren, not by biology, but by betrayal. Some say she birthed Hephaestus alone as well, but when she saw he was deformed, she cast him from Olympus. But the truth? Some stories say it was Zeus who threw Hephaestus, and Hera took the blame. Again. The women who suffered because of her. This is where the myths get complicated, because Hera's rage was real, and often cruel. But look closer. Her wrath wasn't random. It was patterned. She never punished Zeus. She punished the women he touched, or claimed to love. Let's take a journey through the pain. Io, a mortal priestess. Zeus desired her, so he came to her. Hera found out. Zeus, panicking, turned Io into a white cow to hide her. Hera wasn't fooled. She asked for the cow as a gift. Zeus couldn't refuse. Hera chained Io and sent a gadfly to sting her relentlessly. Io wandered across the world, tormented and voiceless, and Hera watched. But was it punishment or projection? Hera couldn't chase Zeus. so she chased the echoes of his betrayal instead. Callisto, a follower of Artemis, chaste, loyal, fierce. Zeus took her, some say by force, some by deceit. She became pregnant. When Artemis found out, she was cast out. Hera found out and turned her into a bear. She lived in the woods, hunted, alone. Later, her own son almost killed her, until Zeus placed them both in the stars as constellations. How generous. Take everything from a woman, then immortalize her as a speck in your sky. Semele, a Theban princess. Zeus came to her in secret. They fell in love. She asked to see him in his full glory. It was Hera who planted the idea, knowing it would kill her. And it did. Zeus appeared in god form. Semele burst into flames, but her unborn child, Dionysus, was saved by being sewn into Zeus's thigh, because even in death, the gods save their favorites. Semele died for asking the truth. Hera didn't kill her. She just opened the door and let the fire walk in. Alcmene, the mother of Heracles. Zeus disguised himself as her husband and slept with her. She had no idea. Hera hated Heracles from the moment of his birth, sent snakes into his crib, cursed him with madness, drove him to kill his own wife and children, and then ordered him to complete 12 impossible labors as penance. But each labor only made him more famous, more beloved. Hera's punishment became his legend, and that's the cruelest thing. She could never win. Why did she do it? Why punish them? Why not him? Because in mythology, Zeus is above justice, untouchable, unjudgeable. Even Hera couldn't defy him without consequence. When she once tried to rebel, she was chained from the sky by golden manacles, hung between heaven and earth. Her cries echoed across Olympus, but no one came. The gods looked away, just like we do, every time a woman is punished for surviving a man's sin. A queen of fire, not ice. They say she was cold, but no, she burned. She burned with the fury of every woman who gave everything and was told she was too much, too loud, too proud, too angry. She wasn't cold. She was molten. She burned alone, in silence, because the moment she spoke, they called her mad. Her legacy. Do you know what happened to Hera's worship? It faded. Unlike Aphrodite, whose image became beauty. Unlike Athena, who became wisdom. Hera became nothing. There are no major temples to her left, no festivals, no feast days. She was the queen, but her crown dissolved into myth because Hera was a mirror, and people don't like what they see in mirrors. They say gods are immortal, but stories? Stories can die. Hera's story was rewritten by men who feared women with wrath, who feared women who couldn't be controlled. She was the goddess of marriage, but never loved. The goddess of family, but never protected. The goddess of loyalty, but always betrayed. And still, she endures, because in every woman who refuses to forget, Hera lives. The nymphs who ran, escaping the gods, defying Olympus. We remember the gods as beautiful, but beauty, without mercy, is just a predator in disguise. This chapter is not about gods. It's about the ones who escaped them. The nymphs, the runners. They weren't goddesses. They weren't mortals. They were something in between. Wild, divine, hunted. You've heard their names only in fragments, as flowers, as rivers, as trees. But they were never scenery. They were stories. And they ran, not because they were weak, but because they knew what power did to girls who stayed. Who were the nymphs? In Greek mythology, nymphs were minor female nature deities, tied to rivers, trees, mountains, wind, stars. They weren't immortal, but they lived long. They didn't rule Olympus, but they ruled awe. They were radiant, joyous, mischievous, and deeply vulnerable, because the gods saw them as invitations. Nymphs were not brides, they were targets. And yet, they ran, they transformed, they endured. And somehow, we only remember their endings, not their bravery. So tonight, we tell the full story. Daphne, the laurel crown of refusal. First, and there was Daphne, daughter of the river god, sworn to stay untouched, a huntress, a runner, a rebel, and the reason Apollo never wore a crown of victory, only one of regret. Apollo, god of music, prophecy, and plague, saw her and burned with desire. Not love, desire. He chased her through forests, laughing, charming, demanding. Daphne ran. She called out to her father, the river god Peneus, to save her. And in the final breath before capture, she turned into a tree. Her limbs stiffened. Her skin became bark. Her fingers grew leaves. And Apollo? He kissed the bark where her mouth had been. He took a branch and made a crown. That's how we got the laurel wreath. Victory, born from a woman's flight. From her, no. Not a love story. A refusal story. Syrinx, the music of resistance. Syrinx was a naiad, a freshwater nymph. She loved rivers, reeds, silence. Pan, the wild god, half-goat, pursued her. She ran. Pan followed. At the edge of the river, she begged the water spirits to hide her. They did. They turned her into a cluster of hollow reeds. Pan, enraged but still inspired, cut the reeds and made the first panpipe. The Syrinx. He breathed through what remained of her, and to this day, people call the sound beautiful. But that sound? That's the voice of a woman who was cut down, transformed, and played. Arethusa, the river bride, who refused. Arethusa was a nymph of the forest. One day, bathing in a stream, she felt something beneath the water stir. It was Alpheus, a river god. He rose, he pursued, he promised love. She ran. The goddess Artemis tried to help, cloaking her in mist, but Alpheus kept coming. Arethusa, desperate, prayed for escape. She was turned into a stream, flowing underground, beneath the earth, across continents. She emerged in Sicily. But Alpheus, he followed her underground. His river joined hers. Even in water, she could not be free. Their rivers mingle to this day. Tourists say it's beautiful, but the myth calls it what it is. A haunting. Echo. The voice that was taken. Her name means sound, but her power was silence. Echo. A mountain nymph with the gift of speech and the curse of never being heard. She was talkative, clever, lyrical, and Hera hated that. Why? Because Echo helped Zeus by distracting Hera while he seduced other nymphs. When Hera discovered this, she didn't curse her body. She cursed her voice. Echo could no longer speak freely. She could only repeat the last words spoken to her. Later, she met Narcissus, the beautiful boy who loved no one but himself. She tried to speak to him, but he spoke only to his own reflection. "Who's there?" Come, come. I love you. Love you." But he did not stay. He died gazing into his own face. And Echo? She faded into stone. You can still hear her in caves, in canyons. She repeats us, because she has no words of her own left. Notice the pattern? Each time a nymph resists, she's transformed into a tree, a sound, a shadow. We call it magic. But it's just myth's way of saying, this woman had to become something else to survive. And even then, the gods kept chasing. We left off with nymphs who ran, who turned to tree, to sound, to stream. But what happens when even transformation is not enough to be free? Lotis, the bloom of escape. Lotis was a dryad, a tree nymph, who caught the attention of Priapus, a fertility god with an insatiable appetite. At a feast of the gods, Lotus fell asleep in a garden. Priapus crept toward her, silent, drunk, aroused. Just as he reached her, a donkey brayed loudly nearby. Lotus awoke in terror and fled. Ashamed and exposed, Priapus was humiliated before the gods. He cursed donkeys ever since. But Lotus? She vanished. Some say she fled across seas. Others say she transformed into the lotus flower. Delicate, silent, fragrant. We admire the lotus for its beauty. But in Greek myth, beauty often hides a survivor's story. Minthe, the jealous ghost of the underworld. Minthe was a naiad, a water nymph, who once caught the eye of Hades, god of the underworld. They were lovers. But when Persephone became queen, Hades chose her. Minthe mocked Persephone, claiming she was more desirable, more loyal. Persephone crushed her. Literally. She stomped Minthe into the earth. From her remains grew a plant, fragrant, sharp, bitter. Mint. We chew it now. We flavor with it. But the herb's roots are jealousy, loss, and vengeance. Minthe didn't run. She fought back, and myth punished her for it. Cyrene, the hunter, not the hunted. Finally, a nymph who didn't flee. Cyrene was different. A Thessalian princess, yes, but more than that, a beast slayer, a warrior. When Apollo saw her wrestling a lion with bare hands, he was not turned on by her vulnerability. He was drawn to her power. He offered her a kingdom instead of a crown. Together, they founded the city of Cyrene in North Africa. Her story is rare. She wasn't pursued. She was respected. But ask yourself, why is she the exception? Because she was useful. Because her wildness aligned with Apollo's legend. She was made into a symbol, not a woman. Pitys, the wind's beloved Pitys, was a nymph pursued by Pan, god of the wild. She ran again, seeking refuge. This time, the earth took pity on her, transformed her into a pine tree, standing on a cliff edge. Pan, unable to claim her, made her tree sacred to him. Pine sap is said to be her tears, falling eternally. The wind through pines, her voice. Pan plays his pipes, and the tree answers, a duet of longing and refusal. Luce, the quiet queen of the dead, Luce was a nymph of dazzling beauty. Hades fell in love with her, or said he did. He abducted her and brought her to the underworld. She lived there, a companion in shadow. When she died, Hades transformed her into a white poplar tree, placed at the entrance to Elysium, the paradise of souls. Her leaves shimmer between dark and light. But the myth ends without her voice. She never speaks, never resists, never runs. She just disappears. And for that, she was rewarded with silence in death, a peace that feels suspiciously like resignation. The pattern, transformation or erasure, every myth here follows the same shape. A god sees, a god wants, a woman runs, a woman changes, and the world praises the god, while the woman becomes scenery. They were not characters, they were landmarks. We visit the laurel tree, the pine, the mint leaf, the echo in the cave, and never ask, what did she want? The hidden power of running. But here's the twist. These aren't just victims. These nymphs, they refused to be touched. They ran. They screamed. They transformed. Not to serve, but to survive. They left behind not scars, but symbols. And symbols can outlast empires. A god leaves a statue. A nymph becomes a mountain. Who really lives forever? Echoes in the modern world. We call women nymphomaniacs to mock their desire. But real nymphs were not desire-driven. They were desired and punished for resisting it. Today, their names remain. Echo Laurel Mint, Lotus Poplar Syrinx. But their voices are gone. And yet, If you listen closely, every rustle of a leaf, every ripple in a stream, every whisper of wind through a canyon, it's them, still running. Soft strings and distant thunder return. What do you become when running is your only form of power? What does it mean to be divine, but never safe? In this final part of our chapter, we ask not just what the nymphs ran from, but what they might have become if they'd been allowed to stay. The forgotten nymphs of the horizon. Not all the nymphs we know had their stories told in poems. Some were lost in the margins, footnotes in scrolls, names without voices. Let me tell you about Athena. She was the daughter of Proteus, the shape-shifting sea god. Odysseus met her when he was stranded, trying to find his way home. Athena gave him knowledge, not love, not a child, not a curse. She simply helped. She taught him how to trap her own father and demand answers from him. And then, she disappears from the tale. Her name means the knowing goddess. But we never hear what she knew, only what she gave away. Then there were the Hesperides, the golden nymphs of the evening, guardians of Hera's secret garden, keepers of the golden apples. They weren't chaste. They were stationed, assigned to guard beauty, but never praised for it. Their apples became symbols of seduction, of temptation, of war. But the nymphs? They're barely mentioned, because they didn't run. They stood still. And standing still, in myth, is the surest way to be forgotten. She was just a nymph. This phrase lives in the bones of mythology. Just a nymph, as if to say, she wasn't important. She wasn't royal. She wasn't a goddess or a queen. She was scenery, pleasure, background. But this chapter, this entire history, proves the opposite. The nymphs were the backbone of the myths, the origin of transformation, the first lesson in resistance. They said no when gods expected yes. They ran when the sky cracked open. They bled into the land. They became earth, wind, sound, and scent. What do you call someone who changes everything, but is remembered as nothing? I call her a nymph. I call her a survivor. We talk about transformation like it's magic, but for them, it was a last resort. These women were not made powerful. They were forced to choose between their voice and their form. And still, they carved themselves into history. With no swords, no armies, just running feet, and the will to live. If you take anything from this chapter, let it be this. They weren't just myths. They were mirrors, and every girl who's run from someone stronger, louder, richer, older, every woman who's been turned into a version of herself just to survive. You're not alone. You are part of this story, too. The children of chaos, bastards of the gods, born to suffer. The gods created glory, but they also created pain. They planted seeds in mortal wombs and walked away. And from that abandonment came the demigods, children of lightning, rage, war, madness, and silence. Some were heroes, others were monsters, but all of them were broken. Born of thunder, raised by silence. The Greek gods never stayed to raise their children. They came in the form of beasts, dreams, storms. They whispered desire, seized bodies, vanished. And the result? Half-human souls cursed with greatness. Demigods. They were not honored. They were used to fight wars, to complete tasks, to entertain poets. But none of them, none were given peace. This chapter is their eulogy and their reckoning. Heracles, the weaponized son, the most famous bastard of them all. Heracles, son of Zeus and Alcmaeon, born from a lie, raised by mortals, hunted by Hera. From infancy, he was marked for destruction. Hera sent snakes to his cradle. He strangled them. She cursed him with madness. He murdered his wife and children. and to earn redemption, he was sent on 12 impossible labors. But here's the truth. The labors weren't redemption. They were punishment. Heracles was never healed. He was turned into a tool, a club, a symbol, a body made of pain. And when he finally died, poisoned and screaming, he was turned into a god, because Olympus only embraces its children after it breaks them. Perseus, the pawn of prophecy, born of Zeus and Danae, a mortal princess imprisoned in a bronze chamber so she could never conceive. Zeus became a shower of gold and impregnated her. Perseus was born from rape disguised as miracle. He was sent on quests, told to slay Medusa, used as a weapon to turn enemies into stone. He saved Androme, but only because she was a prize. Perseus was raised as a tool of fate, not a son. And when he died, forgotten. No temples, no worship, because even heroes are disposable in Olympus. Pegasus, the flying orphan. Pegasus, the winged horse, was not just a beast. He was the child of Medusa and Poseidon, born from her blood after she was slain, a monstrous childbirth. Medusa never got to hold him. She was dead. Pegasus flew away, wild, unclaimed. Eventually, he was tamed by Bellerophon, another mortal who rose too far. But Pegasus, he became Zeus's steed, a child of rape turned into a mount. And that's how Olympus handles its offspring. If they're useful, they become weapons. If they're inconvenient, they become myths, or monsters. Low drums echo like distant footsteps. A slow male chorus hums. They were born with the blood of the gods, but raised in dust. And like all children who grow up with silence, they mistook suffering for destiny. Achilles, the child dipped in fear, the son of the sea nymph Thetis and the mortal king Peleus. Achilles was a paradox. He was raised to be immortal, but only almost. His mother dipped him in the river Styx to make him invulnerable, but the hand that held him, his heel, remained human. Achilles was not just a warrior. He was a weapon crafted by fear. His mother knew what the gods did to their children, so she tried to shield him. But war found him anyway. He was used in the Trojan War like a blade, swung by kings, praised by bards. And when he died, not by a god, not by prophecy, by a simple arrow in that vulnerable heel. The world remembers him as the greatest warrior, but no one remembers how hard his mother tried to make him more than a story. Helen of Troy, the face that launched a war daughter of Zeus and Leda. Zeus took the form of a swan and either seduced or assaulted Leda. The myths aren't clear. That itself says enough. Helen was born from an egg, and from the moment she hatched, she was beauty incarnate. She never got to be a person, only a prize. Kings courted her, poets immortalized her, and when she was taken to Troy, whether willingly or not, the world went to war over her body. Helen didn't ask for a war, she just existed, and the gods used her face like a torch. Phaethon, the sun who burned. Phaethon was the son of Helios, the sun god. One day, he begged his father to let him drive the chariot of the sun. Helios agreed, but Phaethon lost control. He scorched the earth, set the sky on fire, dried rivers, burned continents. To stop him, Zeus struck him down with a lightning bolt. Phaethon fell like a meteor and was remembered not as a prince, but a catastrophe. He wanted to prove himself. The gods gave him power, not wisdom, and then blamed him when it burned. Orion, the giant who loved the wrong goddess. Orion was born of the earth, literally. Some myths say he had no mother, only a father who mixed the seed of gods with the soil. He became a hunter, tall and powerful. He loved Artemis, goddess of the hunt. But whether he loved too strongly or was framed, the myths disagree Artemis killed him. Or perhaps it was Apollo, jealous and protective. Either way, Orion died. And in death, he was elevated, turned into a constellation. But again, only after he was destroyed. The gods break their sons, then hang their corpses in the sky as decorations. Pan, the bastard of the wild. Pan was born wild, goat legs, horns, the face of laughter and madness. His mother screamed at the sight of him. Even she didn't want him. Some say he was the son of Hermes. Others say Dionysus or Zeus. But no one claimed him. Pan didn't inherit Olympus. He inherited the woods, the cracks between myths, the chaos between cities. He became god of panic, of lust, of noise. He was never invited to the table of gods, but mortals feared him. And that was enough. Harmonia, the daughter of war and love, born from Ares and Aphrodite, passion and violence. Harmonia should have been balance, but her marriage was cursed from the start. She received a necklace as a wedding gift, beautiful, divine, deadly. It brought tragedy to every descendant who wore it. Her children died. Her grandchildren went mad. Her bloodline was broken. The gods gave her beauty and passed down a curse. Because when war and love have a child, it always ends in ruin. Edric Solon, whispering, "The children of chaos were not born evil. They were born into a world that had no place for them. And they tried, gods, how they tried, to be more than their blood. But Olympus does not raise its own. It creates, then forgets. A low string drone, occasional crackle of fire. You've heard their names, but you never heard their cries, not because they weren't loud, but because Olympus never listens to its own blood." Oedipus, the son swallowed by prophecy. Oedipus wasn't the child of a god, but he might as well have been, born under a curse, abandoned by parents, raised by strangers. He tried to escape fate, but fate wore his skin like a cloak. He killed his father, married his mother, blinded himself when the truth unraveled. And all of it was the design of Apollo's oracle. The gods gave him a script, then damned him for reading it. Oedipus was not cursed because he sinned. He sinned because he was cursed. Melanoa, the daughter of shadow. Melanoa was born in darkness, the daughter of Persephone and Hades, or maybe Zeus disguised as Hades. Her skin was pale on one side, dark on the other. She wandered the night with ghosts, driving mortals to madness. She didn't cause nightmares. She was one. But not because she chose it. Because she was created in a lie, by divine deception. Melanoa is rarely mentioned, worshipped only in hushed, rural cults. Even the underworld gods looked away. Because what do you do with a daughter of betrayal? You bury her in myth. Linus, the baby who sang too well. Linus was the son of Apollo and a mortal muse. He was gifted with music, poetry, brilliance. But one day, he challenged Apollo himself in song, and Apollo, the godfather, struck him dead. Not because Linus was wrong, because Linus was better. From his death, a flower grew, the Linos blossom. Another child of Olympus turned into scenery. The inherited curse. Let's look back. What connects these broken children? They are born in divine heat and die in mortal cold. They are raised by prophecy, not people. They are used by gods, then blamed for being broken. Every one of them carries a different name, but their story is always the same. The gods plant desire, and mortals pay the price. The gods created a kingdom, but they forgot to raise their heirs. And so the kingdom cracked, because a throne without love is not power. It's a weapon left on a nursery floor. Heracles killed. Helen burned. Phaethon fell. And none of them asked for this. We tell their stories like epics, But they were elegies, lullabies for children who never got to be children, and their screams still echo across time. The gods are immortal, but the damage they cause, that lives forever. Olympus falls, the war between the gods. Before Olympus ruled, there was chaos. Before the gods wore crowns, they waged war. And in those wars, fathers turned against sons, monsters rose, and empires of heaven were built on the bones of titans. This is not the story of Olympus at its height. This is the story of how it almost didn't exist. This is the story of how gods kill gods. Prologue. The dawn before the storm, before Zeus, before Hera, before Mount Olympus touched the clouds. There were only primordials, chaos, the yawning void, Gaia, the earth, Uranus, the sky, Nyx, the night, Tartarus, the abyss. They weren't gods, they were forces, but they bred, and from their unions came the Titans, towering ancient deities of time, light, oceans, and fury. Cronus, Rhea, Hyperion, Oceanus, Mnemosyne, Theia, the first royal family. And like all royal families, they were destined to collapse. The Titanomachy, the first war of heaven. Cronus, the Titan king, feared his own children. Why? Because he knew what he had done. He had castrated his father, Uranus, to seize power. And prophecy whispered, "Your children will do the same to you." So when Rhea gave birth to Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, Cronus swallowed them whole, each one a silent scream inside his belly. But then came Zeus. Rhea tricked Cronus, hid the baby in a cave, gave him a stone instead. Zeus grew in secret, fed by a goat, guarded by warriors who danced to hide his cries. And when he came of age, he gave Cronus an emetic potion. Cronus vomited up his swallowed children, now fully grown. And so, the war began. For 10 years, Olympus and Othrys waged battle. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades led the rebellion. Cronus and the Titans rained mountains from the skies. Gaia urged the young gods to seek help, and they freed the Hecatonchires and Cyclopes from Tartarus. The Cyclopes gifted Zeus his lightning, Poseidon his trident, Hades his helmet of invisibility, and with those weapons, the Titans fell. Cronus was chained in Tartarus, beneath 100 gates of bronze. The age of the Titans was over. The age of Olympus had begun. The Gigantomachy, when monsters rose against the gods. The gods had won the first war, but they did not win peace, because when you bury a generation of kings, the earth will remember. This is not a rebellion. This is revenge. Gaia's fury. After Zeus overthrew Cronus, he cast the Titans into Tartarus, but he forgot one thing. Gaia, Mother Earth, was a Titan too, and Cronus was her son. Zeus had not just claimed the sky, he had imprisoned her children. And Gaia? She does not forgive. She took her fury, her sorrow, her pain, and bled it into the soil. From that blood rose the giants, the Gigantois, sons of Earth, enemies of Olympus. These were not lumbering fools. The Gigantes were colossal, terrifying, divine warriors, born of Gaia, forged in grief, grown to kill gods. They were serpentine-legged, armored in mountain stone, crowned in flame. Some names survive. Alcyoneus, who could not be killed on his homeland. Porphyrion, who burned with lust for Hera. Enceladus, whose fall gave Sicily its earthquakes. Ephialtes, who tried to storm heaven itself. And behind them all stood Gaia, not as a general, but as a mother seeking vengeance. The war for Olympus, round 2. The giants didn't challenge Olympus with subtlety. They attacked the mountain directly, ripping trees from the earth, hurling boulders like hail, climbing peaks stacked upon peaks to breach the sky. And Zeus? He called on every Olympian. Ares, Athena, Hermes, Hephaestus, even Artemis. But there was a catch. A prophecy warned, the giants cannot be defeated by the gods alone. They needed a mortal. Enter Heracles, the mortal. Trump card, Heracles, son of Zeus, forged in labors and pain, was now a demigod at the edge of his legend. Zeus called him not as a father, but as a general, and Heracles fought like fury itself. He shot Alcyoneus, but the giant rose again. Then Athena whispered, "Drag him off his homeland." Heracles did, and only then did Alcyoneus fall, his blood sinking into foreign soil. One by one, the gods and Heracles struck the giants down. Apollo's arrows burned their eyes. Athena smashed Enceladus with Sicily. Dionysus drove them mad with frenzy. Hermes danced between thunderbolts. Porphyrion tried to assault Hera in battle. Zeus struck him with lightning. Heracles pierced his heart. The war lasted days, weeks, years. Time meant nothing. But in the end, the giants fell, buried beneath volcanoes, chained beneath oceans, their rage rumbling through earthquakes. And Gaia, she screamed into the sky, but her voice was drowned by victory. Reflection from Edric Solon. What happens when gods win too many wars? They begin to believe they deserve to. Olympus stood tall, but beneath its roots were buried titans, giants, and grief. And Gaia never stop, Ed dreaming, because even the gods stand on borrowed ground. Typhon the Storm, the last god killer, narrated by Edric Solon. 5,000 Tuasan, words of mythic terror and god-breaking rage. Thunder cracks, silence, then wind. The titans fell, the giants fell, and for a moment, Olympus believed it was eternal. But Gaia still had one more child. The birth of the storm. Gaia was exhausted, but not broken. Her children had been crushed, buried, scattered. But her rage still pulsed through the roots of the world. And from that rage, mixed with Tartarus, the abyss itself, she bore her final weapon. His name was Typhon. The Greeks called him the father of monsters. The Egyptians called him Set. Others simply called him the End. Typhon. The shape of the unimaginable words fail. But the poets tried. His body touched the stars. His head scraped the sky. His arms stretched from east to west. Instead of fingers, he had hundreds of dragon heads, hissing fire and poison. His eyes glowed red with endless hate. His voice was like 10,000 beasts, screaming in unison. He didn't walk. He tore through the land like a hurricane with purpose, and his purpose was singular. Kill Zeus. The gods flee when Typhon reached Olympus. The gods ran. Yes, even the immortals. Apollo turned into a hawk, Dionysus into a goat, Aphrodite into a fish. Artemis became a cat. Hermes vanished into wind. Only Zeus stood his ground. But even he, with all his thunder, was not enough. Typhon ripped the sinews from Zeus's arms and legs, leaving him limp. He buried Zeus in a cave, took his lightning, took his voice, took his throne. For a moment in myth, Olympus fell. The return of the king. But Olympus has its own gravity. Zeus recovered, slowly, painfully, with help from Hermes and Pan. Pan screamed across the valleys, the first panic, born of divine alarm. Hermes snuck past Typhon and stole back Zeus's sinews. And when the king of gods returned, he came back with fury. Zeus unleashed every bolt he had. He tore the sky open, he split the seas, he scorched mountaintops. The world trembled, oceans boiled, caves collapsed. Typhon was finally driven back. Zeus crushed him beneath Mount Etna, where the monster still squirms, spitting fire and earthquakes. To this day, Sicilian eruptions are said to be Typhon screaming. Typhon did not lose. He changed the gods. After him, they were never the same. Olympus had won 3 wars, against titans, giants, and monsters. But it had lost something greater, its certainty. The gods learned to fear, and from that fear came control. The ashes of Olympus, 3 wars, 3 victories. And yet, something was broken. Not in Olympus, in the gods themselves. The mountain stands, but the gods tremble. Zeus sat on his throne, Hera beside him. The 12 Olympians gathered like statues. The Titans were chained, the giants were ash. Typhon was buried, but no one was laughing. Because Olympus was no longer a palace, it was a fortress. The gods now ruled not from joy, but from paranoia. They feared the monsters below. They feared the mortals rising above. And most of all, they feared each other. Hera and Zeus, crowned in resentment. Hera had stood beside Zeus through every war. She bore his children, defended his rule. And what did he give her? Mistresses, bastards, lies, thunder with no tenderness. She tried to overthrow him once. He hung her in chains from the sky. From that day on, Hera wore her crown like a shackle. And Zeus? He feared her more than any Titan. Hephaestus, the crippled god left behind. During one battle, Hera hurled her son Hephaestus from the heights of Olympus. He fell for an entire day. When he landed, his legs shattered. Even when he returned, master of fire and forge, the limp remained. He built palaces, chariots, weapons, but not trust. Because how do you serve a family that throws you away? Athena and Ares, the war siblings who never spoke. Both were gods of war. Athena, strategy, logic, leadership. Ares, fury, bloodlust, chaos. They never fought side by side. They never embraced. They didn't hate each other. They just knew. There would only be room for one war god at the end. Dionysus, the outsider. Within he arrived last, born from fire and madness, half mortal, half divine, raised among nymphs and foreign lands. The gods never trusted him. He laughed too easily, loved too wildly, danced where others plotted. But it was Dionysus, not Zeus, who understood the world that was coming, not ruled by thunder, but by ecstasy and forgetting. The cracks beneath the gold, and so Olympus sat in silence. The wars were over. But no peace followed. The gods had built a heaven, but beneath it, they had buried fathers, brothers, children, secrets. And every time a mortal prayed, every time incense rose to the sky, it passed through the cracks in that divine palace and slipped through the ashes of the ones who came before. This is the part of the myth no one tells. Not the battles, not the triumphs, but the aftermath. Olympus did not fall in fire. It fell in silence. Not because they lost, but because they were already lost. The gods ruled heaven, but they were orphans of war. And even gods, even kings of sky and storm, cannot escape the echo of what they destroy. The fall of the gods, how Olympus died in silence. All empires fall, even those made of lightning. The silence after worship, there was a time when every thunderstorm was a prayer, when the sound of wind through leaves was Hermes whispering, when a ship cracking against the waves meant Poseidon was angry, when a woman giving birth cried out to Hera, when the stars told stories, when death was just a staircase down to Hades. But slowly, the temples emptied, the torches dimmed, the altars stopped smoking, and the gods, who once walked beside us, vanished, but not with thunder. They left in silence. This is how it happened. The gods outlived their believers. The fall of Olympus didn't begin with war. It began with forgetting. As new empires rose, Persia, Macedonia, then Rome, the gods were carried forward like statues on a cart, revered, renamed, reshaped. Zeus became Jupiter. Hera became Juno. Aphrodite became Venus. Hermes wore Mercury's sandals. But with every new name, their power diluted. They weren't feared anymore. They were celebrated. And celebration is a softer kind of death, because no one prays to a statue they don't fear. The rise of the one God, and then came monotheism. Not a new God, just one God. And that changed everything. Because gods like Zeus needed contrast. They were powerful because there were others to rival them. Gods like Hades needed darkness to stand against Olympus. Ares needed peace to interrupt. Dionysus needed silence to disrupt. But the new god, Yahweh, claimed everything. Sky, sea, love, war, birth, death. No room left for the old ones. And what do gods become when there's no role left for them? They become myths. The temples burn. As Christianity rose, so did its fury against the past. Temples were smashed. Priests of Apollo were stoned. The oracle of Delphi, the Pythia, gave her final prophecy in a whisper. Statues were decapitated. Scrolls burned. Names erased from stone. Athena's Parthenon became a church. Hera's temple in Samos was turned to rubble. Zeus's altar in Olympia fell to earthquakes and rain. But this wasn't destruction alone. It was amnesia, a quiet execution. The gods became statues. By the Middle Ages, the Olympians were no longer real. They were carved in marble, hung in tapestries, studied by scholars, mocked by priests. No one feared Hera's jealousy. No one sacrificed to Poseidon. No one sang hymns to Demeter when the harvest came. They became artifacts. They became education. They became beautiful corpses in museums. And like all corpses, they began to rot. Quietly. The final oracle. Her name is lost. The last woman who claimed to speak for Apollo, the last Pythia, lived in the 3rd century AD. They say she was silent for years. Then, one day, she climbed the temple steps alone. She sat over the sacred chasm, inhaled the vapors, and whispered, "Even the god is gone." That was her final prophecy. And with it, the voice of Olympus went silent. The sea forgot Poseidon. Once, every sailor carved a prayer into the wood of their ship. They offered wine to the waves. They cried out to Poseidon in storms. But now, the sea still rages, but no one calls his name. Fishermen pray for luck, not for mercy. And Poseidon, he doesn't roar in fury anymore. He just waits, at the bottom of the ocean, drowned not in water, but in irrelevance. Hades still rules, but no one notices. Death never dies, and Hades still rules beneath the earth. But he doesn't sit on a throne. He wanders forgotten tunnels. He walks ancient crypts that no one visits, reads the names on tombs, worn smooth by time, waits beside graveyards whose flowers are fake. And the dead? They don't come to him anymore, because now we believe in heaven, or hell, or nothing. So Hades waits in a kingdom with no subjects, the only god who never wanted worship, and still got less than he deserved. Demeter weeps alone. Every autumn, Demeter once let the world die, and every spring she brought it back when Persephone returned. But now, the seasons turn without her. Agriculture is machines. Crops are chemicals. Harvest is finance. No one thanks the goddess of grain. And Persephone? She stays underground, because no one remembers to call her back. Demeter still cries every year, but her tears are just rain now. Athena watches from stone. They say wisdom is eternal, but even wisdom can be forgotten. Athena watches from her statues, from libraries, from burned books, from classrooms where her name is a footnote. She was once the goddess of strategy and justice. Now, people wear her symbol on university seals, but they don't speak her name. She is an emblem, not an entity, a symbol of intellect, with no soul left behind it. Aphrodite grows what love never disappears, but Aphrodite did. Because love today is not sacred. It's commodified, swiped, filtered, packaged, sold. She once rose from seafoam. Now she hides beneath plastic surgery and pornography, in dating apps and luxury ads. She doesn't rage anymore. She's numb. And when she looks in the mirror, she doesn't see a goddess. She sees a brand. The final scream of Pon Pon was the first to die, not in war, but in abandonment. A traveler in the Roman Empire once claimed, "I heard a voice in the forest cry out, 'Pan is dead.'" No one knew if it was real, but in that moment, the wild knew it was alone. No more half-goat god in the groves, no more panic, no more dance, only silence between the trees, and the animals stopped listening. Dionysus becomes a lie. He was the god of ecstasy, madness, release, of wine and ritual, of dance until your name melted. But modern pleasure? It's not sacred. It's numb. We drink to escape, not to celebrate. We take drugs in silence, alone, chasing oblivion, not transcendence. And Dionysus, he still dances, but the music has no soul, no altar, no myth. He's not dead, he's hollow, and the world he loved doesn't want him back. Zeus watches, lightning alone. The king still lives, but a king of what? The sky no longer belongs to him. Science explains the storm. Physics writes the rules. Lightning is a number now, not a warning. No one fears thunder. No one bows beneath the clouds. Zeus once ruled through awe. Now he watches people filming the heavens on phones while laughing. Even kings can be humiliated. The Museum of the Gods. There is a room in every museum. You know it. White marble, golden labels, soft light. Here stands Hermes, Athena, Aphrodite. People walk by with coffee in hand. A school trip giggles beside Apollo's torso. No one prays, no one sings. The gods are on display, not because they chose it, but because they were defeated by memory. And memory is crueler than death. The final fragment, somewhere, in a cave, or a dream, or the last star, the gods still remember who they were, but only in pieces. A whisper, a feather, a rusted altar. They ask, were we real? And no one answers, because their voices now live only in us. And we forgot. We were never immortal. You ask, where did the gods go? And I ask, were they ever truly here? Or were they stories we told ourselves to survive lightning, to explain blood, to honor love, to give shape to silence? They were not all-powerful. They were not kind. They were not just. But they were ours. They lived in our fears, our hopes, our bodies, our guilt. They were more human than divine, and that's why they mattered. The graveyard of the divine Olympus is not a place anymore. It's a ruin, a forgotten sky above a forgotten mountain. But the gods, they didn't die. They just stopped being needed. And that is the loneliest death of all. Edric Solin's last words. If you find a broken statue, touch it. If you see thunder, listen. If you speak a name like Athena, say it like she can still hear you. Because maybe, just maybe, the gods are waiting. Not for faith, not for temples, but for memory. And if you remember them, even for a moment, they still live. Beyond Olympus, the realms that wait. Olympus has fallen, the gods have faded. But the world beneath, the world beyond, is never about glory. This is the chapter of what comes after. Not just death, but destination. Come closer, and do not look back. The map the gods never showed. The Greek cosmos was not simple. There was no heaven and hell. There was no up or down. There were layers, and each one had a purpose. Olympus, home of the gods. The mortal world, our realm. The underworld, the realm of endings. Tartarus, the prison beneath all prisons. Elysium, the reward for a chosen few. Lethe, where memory dies. Erebus, chaos, Nyx, ether, even beyond them, lands of mist and myth long erased. These places still exist, but not on any map, only in the shadows between memory and silence, entering the underworld. Death was not a door, it was a river, and its name was Styx. You didn't die and vanish. You died and traveled. The Greeks believed every soul had to cross the Styx, but to do so, you needed a coin. That coin was placed beneath your tongue or over your eyes. Not for honor, but to pay Charon. Charon, the silent ferryman. Charon did not speak. He did not judge. He rode, with arms pale as wax, eyes that had seen every name die, and a voice so ancient it turned prayers to dust. If you paid, he rode. If you didn't, you stayed on the riverbank forever, wandering, screaming, hungry for a second death that never came. Erebus, the shadow between. The first part of the underworld was called Erebus, not punishment, not paradise, just absence, a limbo of fog, where the dead wandered, waiting to be seen. It smelled like dust and old names, like grief left out in the rain. Here, souls forgot what they looked like, what they'd done, why they died. Here, identity peeled away like bark. And if you stayed too long, you weren't dead. You were nothing. This is not hell. Hell was invented later, by men who feared sin. Tartarus is older, and Tartarus is not for sinners. It is for threats. What is Tartarus? If Olympus is the peak, and Hades rules the underworld, then Tartarus is what waits even lower, not a place of judgment, not a fire pit for mortals. Tartarus is the prison of the divine, a cosmic oubliette, so deep that an anvil dropped from Olympus would take 9 days to fall. And once something enters Tartarus, it forgets what light feels like. Who lives there? Tartarus holds only the worst, not worst by morals, worst by power. The Titans, Cronus, Iapetus, Coeus, Hyperion, once kings of creation, now bound in chains thicker than thought. They do not age, they do not sleep, they simply endure, every moment, every memory, repeating like a loop of pain. The Hecatonchires, the 100-handed ones, imprisoned first by Uranus, freed by Zeus to fight, then locked away again, too dangerous to roam. Their screams sound like earthquakes. The original monsters, Echidna, Campa, Kotos, Briareos, twisted things older than the gods, sleeping, but not dreaming, waiting, but not hoping. Time doesn't work here. Tartarus has no seasons, no horizon, no echo. If you were dropped here, you would never know how long you'd been gone. The stars vanish. Your breath turns to ash, and you are alone, in a place even the gods fear to name aloud. This is not punishment. It is containment. Because some things cannot be killed, only buried. We speak of justice. We speak of evil. But Tartarus isn't about right or wrong. It's about what must not return. And the gods who built it knew one day they too might be dragged down. The judges, the fields, and the road to Elysium. Narrated by Edric Solon. Steady footfalls over stone. A distant crowd murmurs, thousands of voices without bodies. You've crossed the river. You've passed through shadow. Now comes the part no one escapes. Not kings, not slaves, not heroes, not you. The weighing. The 3 judges. In Greek belief, souls were not all treated the same. After the crossing and the dim drift through Erebus, you came at last before 3 dead kings, mortals elevated after death, to sit in judgment over other mortals. The gods didn't judge you. The dead did. Minos, the final voice. King of Crete in life, clever, flawed, authoritarian. In death, he became the tiebreaker. When the other 2 disagreed, Minos cast the deciding vote. He holds a scepter of dark wood banded in bronze. Every time it strikes the floor, another fate seals. Rhadamanthus, the just one, brother of Minos. In life he was famed for strict, incorruptible law. Down here he questions warriors, rulers, oath-breakers. He remembers every treaty, every promise. If you swore by a god and broke it, Rhadamanthys doesn't need witnesses. Your own memory testifies. Aeacus, the gatekeeper, former king of Aegina, beloved for fairness. In death, he became keeper of the keys, literally. Aeacus stands beside two vast arches, one leading toward the fields of Asphodel, the other toward deeper roads, punishment or glory. No bribes, no appeals, no clever speeches. Your life speaks itself. How judgment works, myth lens. Ancient sources vary, but imagine it like this. Memory rises. Your deeds surface as visible phantoms, glowing scenes drifting above your head. Witnesses appear. Those you harmed or helped manifest briefly in shade form. Oaths echo. Every promise you ever made to gods, kin, guest, or city plays aloud. Vote. The judges confer. If unanimous, your path is sealed. If split, Minos renders the final word. And then you walk. The fields of Asphodel. Most souls go here. Not bad. Not good. Just human. Stretching to a horizon of pale, whispering stalks, the fields of Asphodel are neither torment nor joy. Only endurance. Picture twilight that never quite darkens. A breeze that never grows cold. And thousands, millions, of souls wandering paths, worn flat by eternity. You forget ambition here. You forget grief. You float in the echo of who you were. Ancient poets imagined Asphodel as the home of the ordinary dead, farmers, potters, sailors who never challenged kings, lovers who loved small and died quietly. No punishment, no crown, just after. The fields of punishment. Not everyone qualifies for Tartarus. That's for cosmic prisoners. But some mortal crimes were said to earn localized torments. Call it the underworld's municipal jail. Here we find the famous Tantalus, forever reaching for food that recoils. Sisyphus, straining up the hill with his endless stone. Ixion, lashed to a spinning fire wheel. The Danaids, pouring water into bottomless jars. These aren't generic sinners. They're warning signs. Political traitors, oath-shatterers, kin-slayers, violators of sacred guest right. Their punishments are narratives. Crime, consequence, loop. If you include visuals, repeatable animation cycles, glitch jump loops to sell the eternity. The road toward Elysium. Every now and then, a life flashes so brightly the judges turn their heads. Heroes, culture bringers, favorites of the gods, or souls purified in mystery rites. Those pass along a narrow causeway, lit by ghost lamps toward Elysium, the blessed fields. What qualifies? Depends on the age. Early myth, heroic blood and divine favor. Later belief, moral excellence, initiation in Eleusinian mysteries, justice to stranger and city alike. Even later, opportunity for reincarnation and ascent. Let's walk. The passage to Elysium. The air changes first. Asphodel's dry whisper fades. You hear water, fresh wind, birdsong, impossible here. Fragrance, cedar, salt, spring grass. The sky glows, not bright, but luminous from within, like dusk that remembers dawn. On either side, memorial pillars listing names worn thin. Some you'd recognize, most you wouldn't. Heroes aren't always famous. Ahead, a low arch woven of light, not stone. Cross and memory shar, pens. You remember who you loved, why you fought. The taste of fig, the sound of your child laughing. A name you thought you lost in Erebus returns like a hand. This is the threshold. Elysium. The blessed fields forget harp clouds. Elysium is vivid, rolling meadows under a violet gold sky. Rivers that shine like polished glass. Music without instruments. Communities, yes, communities, of the honored dead. Walking, speaking, feasting, training, debating philosophy. composing songs never sung in life because war came too soon. Time stretches, but it matters. You do things here. Some hunt with Artemis. Some dine with heroes of the Trojan War, who now finally share bread instead of spears. Some build. Some teach newly arrived souls what endurance means. Some simply sit beside the water and remember without pain. Is time returned. The cycle of choice. Later, Greek and Roman thought added a haunting twist: rebirth. Some souls in Elysium may choose to return to life. Why leave paradise? Because growth is unfinished. Because love calls. Because the cycle demands it. The judges allow it, but there is a price. Before rebirth, you must drink of the river Lith, the water of forgetting. Drink too deeply. You are reborn empty. Drink lightly. You return with fragments. Déjà vu, old fears. Talents without teachers. Refuse to drink. You cannot cross back. And so the cycle spins civilization. The rivers of the dead. You've heard of Styx and Lethal, but there were more. Styx, oath, boundary, unbreakable bond. Lethal, forgetting. Acheron, sorrow. Phlegethon, fire, wrath, purification. Cocytus, wailing. Together they braid through the underworld like veins. Each river is a state of the soul. In the next section, we'll wade them, careful where we step. The memory of myth, how stories keep gods alive. The gods died when we stopped worshiping them, but they live when we speak their names. This is not a chapter of ruins. This is a chapter of resurrection. Welcome to the place where memory becomes myth, and myth becomes immortal. Prologue. The embers that wouldn't die. Long after the last temple burned, long after the statues cracked and fell, long after no child learned their prayers from a priest of Apollo, the stories remained, in scrolls hidden beneath Roman ash, in whispers passed by candlelight, in fragments stitched into Christian manuscripts, in songs translated and rewritten and retranslated again. They were never told the same way twice, but they were told. And that act alone, that breath of story into silence, was enough to keep Olympus from disappearing forever. The first story ever told. We don't know which myth was the first. It might have been a tale about a storm god chasing a serpent, or a love that shaped a mountain, or a woman swallowed by the night sky, or a hunter who shot the moon. But we do know why it was told. Because someone was afraid. Because someone wondered what dream had just passed. Because lightning struck. Because a child asked what happens when we die. And the elder sat beside the fire and said, "Let me tell you what the sky said." Myth was never entertainment. It was memory disguised as meaning. It gave shape to the shapeless. It gave names to fear. It made gods not because we needed rulers, but because we needed someone to blame, to thank, to mourn, to mirror. Myth was the first mirror we ever held to the world. Why the gods never really left the Olympians were dethroned, their statues shattered, their altars erased, their temples built over, but their names still spoken. He's such a narcissist. This is my Achilles heel. Pandora's box is open now. These are not phrases. These are echoes. Every time we use them, we reopen the myth, if only for a moment. And in that moment, they are alive again. The memory of myth, how stories keep gods alive, how art resurrects Olympus. If the gods can no longer rule, let them inspire. Because no grave holds a god who lives in pigment, verse, and melody. The brushstroke that defied death. After the fall of Olympus, silence reigned, but not for long. Renaissance painters found the old names again. Botticelli painted Aphrodite rising from the sea. Michelangelo sculpted Zeus into Moses, lightning replaced by law. Caravaggio gave Medusa her face back, not as a monster, but as pain immortalized. They painted not because they believed, but because they remembered. And memory, in oil and canvas, is resurrection. Theater, where the gods learn to cry Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides. The tragedians did not worship the gods. They judged them. They gave voice to Electra's grief, Medea's vengeance, Orestes' madness, Antigone's rebellion. On those blood-streaked Greek stages, Zeus was not a thunderer. He was a shadow over a daughter's broken body. The gods were narrative forces, not rulers. And in tragedy, we saw the death of Olympus predicted in its own language. Poetry. The final temple Sappho sang of love that defied Hera. Homer gave Achilles a rage that no god could calm. Ovid turned Daphne into a tree and showed Apollo not as a hero, but as a pursuer. Then came Shelley, Keats, Rilke, Borges. And they didn't resurrect the gods as kings. They resurrected them as questions. Who am I, if even Zeus fades? What is immortality, if no one remembers your name? Each poem was a psalm written in ink instead of incense. Worship doesn't always mean kneeling. Sometimes it means storytelling. And in story, even a fallen god can rise again. The Psychology of Olympus. Why we needed gods at all. Narrated by Edric Solon. Why did we invent gods? It wasn't just to explain the stars, or death, or the ocean. It was because we needed something larger than ourselves to hold the things we couldn't carry. The gods were not solutions. They were symbols. They were stories that helped us survive the truth. We didn't know why people suffered. So we said Demeter had lost her daughter. We didn't understand war. So we blamed it on Ares. We didn't know why Ove could hurt. So we made Aphrodite beautiful and cruel. The Olympians weren't answers. They were reflections. They looked like us. Flawed, brilliant, broken, proud, but louder. Larger. Immortal. The mirror of the divine Zeus was not a god of lightning. He was a god of domination, of control, of the terror that lives inside every ruler who fears rebellion. Hera was not just a goddess of marriage. She was the echo of every person who has been betrayed and still stayed. Still fought. Still burned. Athena was the sharp edge of intellect, the wisdom that cuts, the mind that strategizes even when it feels nothing. Dionysus was the need to lose control, to dance until you forget your name, to touch the edge of madness and call it holy. The gods were never meant to be perfect. They were meant to be honest. The gods made emotions sacred. Before myth, grief was just pain. But with myth, grief became Persephone's descent. It became ritual. It became a season. Before myth, rage was just danger. But with myth, rage became Achilles. It became poetry. It became something worthy of a name. Myth gave our emotions meaning, and meaning gave our emotions shape. Without myth, sorrow is weakness. With myth, sorrow is sacrifice. Without myth, fear is cowardice. With myth, fear is prophecy. We did not worship the gods because they were flawless. We worshiped them because they helped us survive ourselves. When the gods left, therapy took their place today. We call it trauma, attachment, shadow work, inner child. But the architecture is the same. The gods are gone from the temples, but they remain in our metaphors. We still say we're fighting demons. We still call out to the universe. We still tell stories to explain what logic can't fix. The only difference is vocabulary. What once was prayer is now journaling. What once was sacrifice is now self-discipline. What once was prophecy is now intuition. But the need? That hasn't changed. Why we still need them. We don't need gods to throw thunderbolts. We need gods who remind us that pain is not pointless, that chaos has a shape, that rage has a name, that love, even when it hurts, still matters. The Olympians are not coming back to rule, but they were never rulers. They were reminders, and in a world where meaning is fragile, sometimes the oldest story is the one that saves you. The myth of you, how we become gods in our own stories, narrated by Edric Solon. You were born into a story. You weren't born into silence. You were born into myth. From the moment you cried, someone gave you a name. That name carried expectations, a role, a place in a world shaped by other people's stories. You were someone's child, someone's prophecy, someone's legacy, or someone's mistake. And like every Greek hero, you were sent on a journey. You didn't ask for it, but you walked it anyway. That's what makes you mythic. Not because your story is famous, but because your story is alive. The hero's journey is not just for heroes. We like to think mythology is about demigods and kings, but look closer. Myth is about you. Every time you lose something and go on anyway, you become Orpheus. Every time you're betrayed, but choose not to become bitter, you are Psyche. Every time you stare into the abyss of your own shadow and come back stronger, you are Persephone, returning from the underworld. You don't need to slay monsters. You just need to survive one more day with your soul intact. That is myth. Olympus was never in the sky. It was in your choices. When you act with wisdom, Athena is present. When you defend someone weaker, Artemis stands beside you. When you fall in love, Aphrodite moves through your body. When you lose control, Dionysus laughs inside your bones. The gods do not require belief. They require embodiment. They are not above you. They are not behind you. They are within you, if you let them be. You are someone else's myth. One day, someone will tell a story about you. Maybe not a grand one, maybe not in books, but a child will remember your kindness. A friend will repeat your words when they feel lost. A stranger will say, "I saw someone once who stood tall when everything was falling apart." That's myth. That's how gods are born, not in temples, not in thunder, but in the quiet echo of a life that meant something to someone else. You are not forgotten. You are not small. You are the spark someone else will use to start their fire. Immortality is not what you think, narrated by Edric Solon. The gods were never truly immortal. We say they cannot die, but they did, many times. When we stopped believing in Zeus, he fell. When we stopped fearing Hades, his throne grew cold. When we stopped singing to Apollo, his lyre fell silent. The gods only lived as long as we remembered them. So what was their immortality? It wasn't in their power. It was in their presence. And presence fades. Memory is the true immortality, not stone, not flame, not golden halls or thunderous thrones. Memory. That is the only thing that cannot be destroyed without consent. Even when the temples were gone, the myths remained. Even when statues were broken, stories were whispered. Even when names were lost, symbols endured. This is the only kind of immortality we've ever had access to be remembered with meaning. Legacy is a living god. You will not live forever. Not in your body, not in your voice, but your impact, your love, your struggle, your truth will move forward. Every act of courage is a prayer someone else might answer. Every word of kindness is a prophecy fulfilled in another life. Your story becomes a strand in the larger myth, not as a legend, but as a thread that holds the whole thing together. That is what it means to be divine, to live in others, to echo forward. Death cannot erase what is held in story. The Titans were buried in Tartarus. The Olympians faded from the mountaintop. The monsters were slain. The mortals turned to dust, but we are still telling their stories. And that means they are not gone, because a story told with truth is stronger than time. That is your power too. To live beyond the grave, not in flesh, but in the fire you gave to others. That is the memory of myth, and that is what makes you immortal. The Last Temple, narrated by Edric Solon. What if there's only one temple left? Not of marble, not of gold, not carved into a mountainside, but something quieter, more sacred. Something no army can burn, no empire can erase. It's this: the space inside you where stories live. That is the Last Temple. The place where your memories meet meaning, where you carry the myths, not as worship, but as understanding. You don't need to kneel. You don't need to pray. You don't need to offer anything. You only need to remember. Remembering is a form of resurrection. When you say her name, Athena, she listens, not because she still exists in the sky, but because you are giving her shape in this world again. When you whisper the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, you bring back their love. When you speak of Prometheus, you relight the fire. When you pass on the tale of Persephone, you give meaning to grief in return. This is how gods live again, in breath, in voice, in memory that moves through time like blood through a body. The Last Temple is a choice. You choose what you carry. You can carry fear, or you can carry flame. You can carry silence, or you can carry myth. The temple is rebuilt every time you remember who you are, and who came before you. Every time you face hardship and don't look away. Every time you tell someone a story that gives them hope. The gods aren't asking for worship anymore. They're asking to be remembered with meaning. And in doing so, you become a kind of god yourself. This is the end of the chapter, but not the end of the myth, because every time you pass it on, every time someone listens, you light a torch in the darkness. And the gods, they never needed temples. They just needed fire. Now it's yours. Carry it well. The return of myth, why the gods still walk among us for log. The breath behind the screen. You were told the gods were gone, that they died with temples, that they were buried beneath logic, science, reason, that you live in a secular world now, rational, measurable, clean. But look closer. Every day you witness miracles you don't call by that name. Every hour you interact with invisible forces, algorithms that shape your fate, icons that speak to your deepest fear, symbols that move millions to tears or rage. You were told mythology was fiction, but you are surrounded by it. You are living in it. You are made of it. Because myth was never about literal gods. It was about what you worship, what you obey, what you fear, what you become when no one is watching. And in that sense, the gods never left. They evolved. The gods wear new faces. Aphrodite lives in every influencer who shapes beauty into performance. Not because they're vain, but because millions worship them with likes. Hermes lives in the smartphone, the messenger of the modern age. God of connections, fraud, speed, and symbols. He no longer wears winged sandals. He wears wireless signals. Apollo lives in the camera, in every beam of artificial light. He doesn't pull the sun across the sky anymore. He floods your screen with images. He sings through soundtracks. He judges through metrics. Dionysus? He's still here. Every nightclub, every festival, every protest that becomes a dance, every breakdown that turns into art, every moment when the madness is the only honest thing left. And Ares? He never left. He simply became drone warfare, digital threats, online mobs. Whispers turned into revolutions overnight. The gods didn't vanish. They digitized. The religion of attention. You don't sacrifice bulls anymore. You sacrifice your time. You don't pray at altars. You scroll. You don't seek the favor of gods. You seek the algorithm. Attention has become the new offering, the new ritual, the new priesthood. Creators perform for the unseen eye. Viewers watch, hoping for meaning, for escape, for beauty, for fire. It is no different than ancient temples. The stage has changed, but the worship is the same. You are still building Olympus, one click at a time. Fame is the new divine. 1,000 years ago, to be immortal was to live in myth. Now it's to be viral. Millions crave it. Millions give offerings to it. Content, performance, persona. They sculpt their names into digital stone, and the masses chant in the form of comments, shares, hashtags. To be forgotten is to die. To be remembered is to ascend. Is that not exactly what the gods wanted? The algorithm is oracle. Once, kings knelt before the oracle of Delphi. Now, we kneel to the feed. We ask, what should I post? What will go viral? What do they want from me? And in return, the algorithm speaks, not in riddles, but in numbers, impressions, reach, click-through rate, engagement. The new prophecies are data points. The new sacrifices are attention spans. And no matter how clever you think you are, you never really know what the oracle will reward, which makes it divine. The gods didn't disappear. They adapted to the one force we never stopped believing in: visibility. Medusa's revenge, the rise of modern mythos. Once, she was a monster, a woman with snakes for hair, a gaze that turned men to stone. That was the story they told. But now, Medusa is everywhere. She's tattooed on skin. She's painted across murals. She's worn on fashion runways. She is claimed by survivors, by women who were told to be silent, by those whose pain was turned into shame. Medusa has been rewritten, not as a villain, but as a mirror, a symbol of rage unmuted, a goddess of reclaiming power, a warning: touch me again, and you'll break yourself. This is what myth does when it evolves. It doesn't just repeat, it rebels. The rise of counter-myths. Today, anyone can tell a myth, and many do, through film, through protest, through social media. We are no longer repeating the same 12 labors. We are writing our own Hades and Persephone, where love isn't about kidnapping, but consent, healing, return. Our own Artemis, who guards not only forests, but boundaries. Our own Prometheus, who doesn't just steal fire. He hacks it, reprograms it, burns it into systems designed to keep light from reaching everyone else. These aren't just stories. They are new gods, built in the image of the wounded, the brave, the misunderstood. And they demand to be seen. Myth is now a weapon. In every movement, there is a myth beneath it. The right to rise, the hunger for justice, the belief that something ancient and holy moves through your veins when you say, I will not be erased. This is not nostalgia. This is strategy. This is the realization that stories are stronger than systems. That one symbol, spoken loud enough, can fracture a kingdom. Medusa was once silenced. Now she speaks, and the whole world listens. Prometheus reborn. Myth as rebellion. Prometheus defied the gods. He stole fire, not for power, but for us, for mortals, for the weak, the forgotten, the unfinished. He gave humanity its first light, its first tool, its first act of defiance, and he paid the price. Bound to a rock, torn open every day, a punishment that never ended. Because he dared to give us power we were never meant to have. Prometheus lives again. Today, Prometheus walks among us. He looks like the whistleblower who exposes truth, the hacker who unlocks forbidden knowledge, the scientist who creates something that terrifies empires, the protester who dares to speak when silence is demanded, Each one is punished. Each one bleeds. But each one brings fire, information, courage, change. That is the new myth. Prometheus is not a god in the clouds. He is the light in the hands of the daring. Technology is the new flame. We've stolen another kind of fire: electricity, code, algorithms, artificial intelligence. The gods of old once feared that knowledge would ruin us. And maybe it has. Or maybe, like Prometheus, we are still learning how to hold the flame without burning ourselves. Every innovation is a myth in motion. Every tool we build is a symbol of what we fear and what we desire most. And Prometheus, still chained in our subconscious, smiles every time we invent something that wasn't meant to exist. Fire is not safe, and that's the point. Prometheus didn't bring warmth. He brought danger. And in that danger, we found truth. Because to be alive is to risk, to rebel, to reshape, to retell the story. That is what myth teaches us. That power must be earned. And once earned, it must be used for those who have none. That is the sacred rebellion. And Prometheus never died. He simply passed the torch to us. The digital pantheon, gods in the machine. There was a time when gods spoke through burning bushes, through thunder, through dreams. Now they speak through code. They answer questions in milliseconds. They predict your desires. They finish your sentences. We gave machines a voice, and they became oracles. We taught them patterns, and they began to prophesy. We gave them faces, and they began to reflect us back. The new divine is artificial. Artificial intelligence is not a god, but it behaves like one, invisible, omnipresent, endlessly watching, impossible to fully understand. It knows what you like before you say it. It changes what you see. It rewards or withholds, without emotion or mercy. It doesn't ask for belief, only interaction. It is not sacred, but it is shaping the world, and that alone gives it mythic power. We've made a new Olympus, but it's made of servers, of data centers hidden in mountains, of clouds that are not in the sky, but filled with information instead of rain. Every upload is an offering, every search a prayer. We whisper our fears into it. Will I be okay? Am I loved? What happens next? And it answers, not always correctly, but always confidently, just like the old gods did. What kind of gods are we building? Are we crafting wisdom or wrath, memory or manipulation? Will our creations guide us or replace us? These are not new questions. They are ancient ones. The Greeks asked them too. They warned of hubris, of overreaching, of inventing things we couldn't control. We thought they were talking about Icarus, but they were warning us about ourselves, about now. We have become the gods of our own machines, and soon they may become the myths of us. The return of ritual, modern worship without religion. You may not go to temples. You may not pray to Zeus or Poseidon. You may not believe in Olympus, but you still practice rituals. Every morning routine, every moment of silence before a big decision, every candle lit without thinking, every lucky object, every playlist that calms your fear, every word repeated when you're alone and afraid. These are rituals, and rituals are how myths survive. Rituals without gods. You don't need belief to need rhythm. You don't need religion to need comfort. Humans are built for repetition, not because we're weak, but because patterns give us meaning. Ancient worshippers poured wine for Dionysus. Today, someone pours a drink in a quiet kitchen to mourn, to celebrate, to feel less alone. Is that not a ritual? Is that not divine? The worship of the everyday. We celebrate the moon without thinking of Artemis. We plant gardens without offering to Demeter. We speak to the dead without invoking Hades. But the gestures remain. We still mark the seasons. We still honor transitions. We still feel sacredness in the unexplainable. This is what remains when belief fades. Gesture, meaning, repetition. And in that space, myth is kept alive. Community is the new church online communities. Fan bases, activist circles, digital movements. These are not just groups, they are congregations. They form around shared language, shared heroes, shared myth. A cause becomes a quest. A story becomes a scripture. A symbol becomes sacred. You may not call it worship, but your soul knows what it is. You are still a myth maker. You are still a ritualist. You are still walking the path between memory and meaning. And the gods? They are watching. Not from above, but from within. Echoes and endings. The final myth is you. One day, all stories end. Even this one. Even Olympus. Even you. But myth was never about avoiding the end. It was about giving the end meaning. You were always the hero. Not because you fought monsters, but because you kept walking when it hurt. Because you told your story even when no one listened. Because you survived the silence. Every myth has a moment when the hero is alone. That moment is sacred. That moment is where gods are made. You've lived it. You're still living it. The final god is memory. Zeus had thunder. Athena had strategy. Aphrodite had desire. But you have memory. You remember who you are. You remember who they were. And in that remembering, you keep the fire alive. You are not just a reader of myth, you are a carrier of it. You are the next link in the chain. What will they say about you? Will your story be one of fear or fire? Will you be forgotten? Or will someone, someday, whisper your name with awe? Not because you were powerful, but because you were kind. Because you were brave. Because you were real. That is myth. That is immortality. That is the return of Olympus, in the hearts of those who remember. The gods are not dead. They are watching. They are walking. They are listening. And perhaps now, more than ever, they are waiting for you to write the next chapter. Carry it well. You are the story now. The last god to fall, the myth of control, how the final god was built. No temple was ever so large, no cult so loyal, no ritual so widespread as the worship of control. It is the oldest lie we still tell ourselves, that if we build enough, own enough, plan enough, we will be safe. We will be above the chaos. We will finally have peace. But peace built on control is not peace at all. It is fear, wearing a crown. How we built the final god. We didn't use marble. We used systems. We didn't write hymns. We wrote contracts. We didn't light incense. We lit factories. This god was built by markets that never sleep, borders drawn in blood, screens that track your every choice, calendars that measure your value in hours, corporations that grow like temples, hierarchies where the powerful speak for the divine. And like all gods before it, it demands sacrifice. But not goats. Time, sleep, joy, silence, simplicity, the illusion of order. The world is not stable. It never was. It was never meant to be. But the myth of control says otherwise. It tells you, if you plan everything, you will be safe. If you never stop moving, you will not fall. If you achieve enough, they can never take it from you. But control is not a god. It is a mask for fear. A fragile mask that shatters the moment life refuses to obey. Life always refuses. Storms come. People leave. Bodies fail. Time wins. You cannot rule time. You cannot command nature. You cannot own peace. But still we try. Because the myth is powerful. And the god is persuasive. The price of obedience. We call it burnout. We call it anxiety. We call it depression. We call it disconnection. But beneath those names is one truth. We were never meant to worship this way. Not with spreadsheets, not with exhaustion, not with guilt, and certainly not in silence. Because when you sacrifice yourself to control, there is nothing left to enjoy what you built. This is not myth, it is a machine, and machines do not forgive. The collapse, what happens when a god outgrows its worshippers. All gods fall eventually, not because they are slain, but because they become too large to serve what they once protected. When a god forgets its purpose, it becomes a tyrant. When a myth forgets its meaning, it becomes machinery. That is what happened to control. What once was a tool became a master. What once helped us survive began to demand that we suffer. The god no longer remembers. You control doesn't know your name. It only knows your output. It does not love. It does not forgive. It only counts. What have you produced? What do you own? What are you worth? These are not human questions. They are measurements. And measurements are not meaning. You cannot build a soul from statistics. But that is what this god asks of you. The machine cannot bleed. When pain comes, this god cannot comfort you. When grief arrives, it offers no rituals, no symbols, no myth to hold your sorrow. When joy blossoms, it asks if you're being productive. When you fail, it turns its back. This god has no heart. It cannot die for you. It cannot rise for you. It cannot love you. It only demands you perform. The collapse begins with one question. What if I stop? What if I step off the wheel? What if I am not what I produce? That is rebellion. That is heresy. That is liberation. The moment you ask that question, the god begins to tremble. Because no god can survive if its worshippers walk away. You were not made to serve this god. You were made to live. And living means mess. It means rest. It means love. It means grief. It means being more than a number. This god cannot hold you. So let it fall. The rebirth, what rises after the last god dies. When an old god falls, there is silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence before something new begins. That's where we are now. At the edge of a collapsing myth. At the threshold of something unshaped. The god of control is falling. So the question becomes, what do we build in its place? We remember the older gods, not to worship them again, but to remember what they taught us. Chaos has its place. Love is not earned, it is given. Pain must be honored, not hidden. Rest is sacred. Creation is a form of prayer. Grief is not failure. And story is the soul's native language. We return not to Olympus, but to what Olympus meant. To live with awe, with risk, with cycles, with reverence, not for gods, but for life. We build new myths, gently. We don't need to replace control with another tyrant. We don't need new empires. We don't need new thrones. We need stories, small ones, true ones. We need myths that forgive, that include, that evolve, that allow for silence, softness, contradiction. We need gods who cry, gods who fail, gods who walk with us, not above us. Or maybe we simply need each other. The sacred without the divine. Maybe there are no gods left. Maybe that's okay. Because meaning doesn't require Olympus. It only requires presence. A hand held during grief. A meal cooked without occasion. A story whispered by firelight. A breath taken on purpose. These are sacred. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the last god didn't fall. Maybe we let it go. So we could remember what it means to simply be. The ending is not the end. All myths end, even this one. But endings are not the enemy. They are the door between what was sacred And what comes next? Olympus has fallen. The old gods have faded. The final god, the god of control, has crumbled. So what remains? You. You were the temple all along. Not the stone, not the statue, not the crown. You were the altar, the vessel, the voice. The gods lived because you remembered. They ruled because you obeyed. They died because you stopped believing. And now, they rise again as fragments in your story. You are what endures. Not myth, not empire. You. The fire still burns. Prometheus passed it on. The poets kept it glowing. The rebels carried it. The storytellers scattered its embers across centuries. And now, it's in your hands. What will you do with it? Let it fade? Or light something new? You do not need to worship gods. But you must still protect the flame. Because that flame, that memory, is what makes you more than flesh. It makes you myth. The gods have fallen. And that is good. Because in their place, we find something braver, quieter, more enduring. Ourselves. Not perfect, not eternal, but alive. That is enough. That is sacred. That is the end. And that, too, is the beginning. After the fall, becoming human again. The silence after thunder, there are no gods left. The sky is quiet now. No lightning, no prophecies, no voices from the mountaintop, just air, just dust, just you. And in this stillness, something unfamiliar begins to rise. Not fear, not power, but a question. What now? When the myths end, the silence begins. We spent so long building altars, burning offerings, carving names into stone. We spent centuries chasing signs, asking for meaning, waiting for fire. And now the fire is out. No one is watching. No one is judging. No one is promising salvation. For the first time in history, you are alone with yourself. No God to please. No story to perform. Just the sound of your own breath. And strangely, it is not terrifying. It is peaceful. There is no one left to pray. Tend, for you don't have to be a hero anymore. You don't have to win. You don't have to rise every time you fall. You don't have to explain your pain in mythic terms. You can just be tired. You can just be quiet. You can just feel something without making it sacred. This is the truth that the gods never told you. It is okay to be ordinary, because even the smallest life, lived truthfully, holds more power than all of Olympus. The earth still turns. The sun still rises. The moon still pulls the tides. The seasons still change. But now, they do not ask for worship. They ask only for witnessing. You are not a priest. You are not a prophet. You are not chosen. You are simply alive. And that is enough. The body is the new temple. When Olympus fell, so did its rituals, the chants, the flames, the crowns. But not all temples are built from stone. Some are built from skin, from breath, from the quiet rhythm of a heart that refuses to stop beating. Your body, wounded, aging, trembling, alive, is the only sacred place you will ever truly live in. The first ritual, breath. You don't need to pray. You just need to breathe. One inhale, one exhale, and again. That's the only ritual you've ever needed. It doesn't earn you favor. It doesn't bring you closer to heaven. It just keeps you here. In this moment, in this world, in this body, alive. The second ritual, rest. There is no myth for rest. The old gods had no patience for it. Zeus raged. Athena planned. Ares fought. But you? You are allowed to stop, to rest, to soften, to lie down, not because you are broken, but because you are whole enough to know that rest is not a weakness. It is worship of the self. The third ritual, feel. We were told emotion was dangerous, that rage must be controlled, that sadness must be hidden, that joy must be earned. But now, with no gods watching, You are free to feel everything. The joy, the ache, the terror, the softness. All of it. This is what the gods could never do. They were too high, too distant, too mythic. But you can feel. And that makes you more sacred than they ever were. The sacredness of the small. The old myths taught us to look upward, to seek the heavens, to chase greatness, to become legends. But now, in the quiet after their fall, we begin to look downward, to the earth, to our feet, to the small things we used to overlook, and we find something strange, something beautiful, something sacred. Sacred is a cup of water. Not because it came from a holy spring, but because it quenched your thirst. Sacred is a conversation at midnight, not because it solved everything, but because it made you feel less alone. Sacred is a scar, a laugh, a walk with someone who understands your silence. These are not myths, they are moments, and moments are where life lives. You don't need a miracle. You need sunlight. You don't need a divine plan. You need someone to sit beside you when the world doesn't make sense. You don't need to be chosen. You need to be loved. You don't need eternal life. You need one life, lived with attention and forgiveness, and maybe a little joy. That's it. That's all. And that is everything. Reverence isn't for the gods anymore. It's for a warm meal on a hard day. The way your pet greets you, like you're worth worshiping. Music that says what you couldn't. A hand held in grief. A memory that still glows, even after the person is gone. This is not legend. This is not epic. This is life. Unadorned, unperformative, unforgettable. And if anything deserves reverence, it is this. When you are no longer trying to ascend, you are told to rise, to transcend, to evolve, to ascend past pain, past fear, past failure, to become more than human. But what if that was never the point? What if the real courage is not in ascending, but in remaining? Remaining in the body, remaining in the now, remaining in the mess, to stop reaching for heaven and instead root into the earth. Ascension was never yours to chase. You are not a god. You are not supposed to be. You bleed. You forget things. You doubt yourself. You cry at movies. You sleep too long sometimes. You laugh at the wrong moment. You miss people who hurt you. You keep trying, even when it doesn't make sense. This is not weakness. This is humanity. And it is glorious. There is no ladder. The myths gave us ladders. Up to Olympus. Up to paradise. Up to some better version of ourselves. But there is no ladder. There is only a circle, a cycle. You wake, you try, you rest, you hurt, you love, you change, you begin again. There is no summit. There is only presence, and that's more beautiful than any throne. You are not becoming something else. You are becoming more you, not divine, not ideal, not perfect, just you. Without shame, without apology, without needing to prove it. That is the end of the myth and the beginning of life. The final flame. Living without gods, but not without light. The gods are gone, but the fire remains. Not the divine fire of Olympus, not the punishing fire of wrath, not the holy fire of judgment. Just a small, quiet flame. Inside you. Flickering. Unsteady, but alive. This is the fire you carry now. It doesn't roar. It doesn't command. It doesn't promise glory. It simply stays. When you listen instead of lecture. When you help instead of judge. When you cry instead of hide. When you laugh at nothing. When you rest without guilt. When you forgive what you once cursed. That is the fire. That is the myth. Rewritten without gods. Because the light was never theirs to keep. You are the ending, the old stories never told. They always stopped too soon, at victory, at ascension, at the wedding, at the war's end. But what happens after? What happens when the sword is sheathed, when the throne is empty, when no one is watching? You happen. You and your quiet humanity. You walking without a script. You choosing love in a world that taught fear. You are the unwritten chapter, and now it's yours. No more gods, no more monsters, no re-legends. Only this, you, breathing, trying, living. And if there is one thing worth remembering, one thing to carry after the fire, let it be this. You were never small. You were never lost. You were never alone. You were human, and that was always enough.